I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 170th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss the increasing lack of confidence Americans have in our national elections and what we might be able to do to bring back the credibility that our elections once had. Today's panel begins with Joe Gaines, former faculty member of the University of Akron and Wadsworth High School. Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services, and Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. Joe, in recent elections, recent elections have been plagued with accusations of voter suppression and voter intimidation, doctored voting machines, illegal voting, mysteriously appearing and disappearing ballots, vote counting irregularities, and all manner of mischief. Joe, is this our future, or is there something we can do about it? Joe, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Got you, Brian, but I'm waiting for Joe to answer the question, and he's muted. I don't feel bad. The networks are having the same kind of problems. They've got a much bigger budget than we do.
I was on another computer and the audio wasn't working for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, it's working now. Joe, can you hear me, Joe?
How's that?
There.
Oh, okay. Joe, you want me to repeat the question?
No, I got the question.
Okay, great. What's your answer?
Well, my answer is I don't think that there's really a problem any more than there has been in the past. In the 2016 election, was there a problem? No.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
if there was, we never heard of it.
Okay, well.
But my point is this. I think that, and I know I'm going to be received from this, I think Donald Trump actually used that whole idea of a problem in elections to his advantage, or tried to. I don't think it worked. He sowed the seeds of mistrust, sowed the seeds of problems that are going to happen. And if he lost, which he did, it would be not because of voters not voting for him, but because of problems in the election process.
Hasn't it been that way, Joe? Hasn't it been that way for the last 4 or 5 elections?
We haven't heard anything from it. And every time, I mean, when he went to the Senate, to different senators and everything, they all denied it. He never got it voted for. He always got it voted down for it. I don't think that it really did work in his advantage, obviously. But more than that, I feel that the election process is okay. We have to be careful with it. We have to watch it. But I don't think that it's deliberately set to work against us or to cause problems. No.
There are people that still believe that Kennedy lost the election in 1960, and it was stolen by the Chicago machine.
You're still alive?
It's been, anyway. Does somebody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I would.
Go ahead.
I think I would take exception to basically how Donald Trump supposedly took advantage of this. I don't believe there was widespread election fraud, but it doesn't take widespread election fraud and errors to throw an election. Because we do our federal, our president by electoral college, it's the vote margin for the winner and loser in a given state can be well within well within a margin of being, some of those votes could be fraudulent. So we don't do it by the popular vote. So when people talk about, well, Biden won by 81 million votes and Trump had 70 some million votes and there were 6 million more people, it makes no difference. Hillary Clinton for 4 years did not accept the election because she might have conceded, but she believed that the Russians had compromised the election. That's all we heard for the last 4 years. Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, I don't believe she's even conceded the governorship yet. If Trump is to blame, then there's other actors that we can lay this at their feet as well. So it runs on both sides, the Republicans as well as the Democrats. And I think we all need to back away from it and look at ways to ensure that our elections are free and fair and are void of any sort of fraudulent claims. Errors happen, okay? You can make errors. I'm going to defer to Patty. She's worked the polls for many more years than most people. I did it once. I've already shared my views about how I felt about the elections in Ohio. If more states would adopt the procedures of Ohio, I think more people would have confidence in that. You cannot have universal voting. You just can't send out ballots. We don't do that here in Ohio, but some states did that. And when you have more ballots coming back than were sent out, that raises a question. Okay?
So are you saying we need to be uniformed?
I think we do. I
agree with that.
There needs to be a uniform standard for federal elections. And they all, IDs, in Ohio, you don't have to have a driver's license. You can show up with some sort of ID. What is so terrible about that? That the person can show that they actually live in your state, in your voting, in your polling district or your ward. I don't see the harm in that. I don't see the disenfranchisement that we hear all the time if someone has to show up and prove who they are.
Well, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. The only problem I had with Trump and why I brought him up was that, he brought that up as an issue and it hasn't been proven in any such way. He went to Georgia, he went to Minnesota, was it? He went to different states and they disproved it in every case, but he doesn't accept its disapproval.
And I guess I would just repeat what I said. Hillary Clinton didn't accept. They disproved the Russian hoax. They disproved that there was no Russian interference. We spent $30 million on the Mueller investigation.
I'm not so
the
sure
House
that they disproved
impeached the guy. They impeached the guy over a phone call and some other things. So I think both sides have to back away and say, you know what? The Russians weren't involved in throwing the election for Hillary. She lost. Okay.
I don't know why you brought up Hillary.
What's that?
I don't know why you brought up Hillary. Hillary's old news, but my point is this: the Russians are getting involved now.
You've heard it for 4 years. How can
the Russians are getting involved right now? There's proof of it.
We don't know that.
Bryan, it's not an argument to say my guy isn't bad because this other guy is also bad. These are sort of separate cases.
I'm saying they're both bad, but you cannot memory hole 4 years of the left harping about elections and expect people to step back and go, oh, wait, it happened to us now. We're not supposed to complain, or it's not supposed to happen. I think that's faulty logic. You cannot drum into people's head for 4 years that Hillary Clinton is my president. She was elected by the popular vote and throw all doubt about elections and expect people to all of a sudden just agree that there was no fraud or no, because, but trust me, I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but you can't have it both ways. You just can't. We have to step back. We have to have uniform procedures to make sure elections so that everybody feels that they won or lost fairly.
Well, the
Constitution for another time, but again, the Electoral College. Since the last time we talked about this, I'm becoming more convinced we need to do away with that.
So California and New York can run
my vote
everything.
cost be worth more than some vote of somebody in New York or California? Why should it be worth less than somebody in Rhode Island? It makes no sense to me. Sure, there's the argument to keep the federal portion of this going in some ways. I can sort of understand. I can understand that argument, but I'm becoming less and less to believe in it. You're talking about uniform procedures. We've had apparently no particular great amount of frauds or errors in this popular vote. We certainly haven't had any in the Electoral College, in spite of the efforts and people like the Attorney General of Texas, for example, trying to change the system around. But I think it's sufficiently antiquated and sufficiently unfair in my mind. I'm coming to believe that now, and I think we can talk about that at another point. But I would agree, Brian. I think we need a uniform system in some way here.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
And I'm surprised maybe that Republicans would want to do that because it's more big government. But yeah,
it would only take some fine tuning on the state level. I mean, I don't know the types of balloting machines that we used in Ohio. I wouldn't be surprised if they were Dominion. Okay. So I'm not going into the conspiracies that are out there. I'm just saying that if you want to vote, you should be able to show up, produce some ID, have processes in place that if you do show up and you don't have ID and you don't have the necessary documents, that you vote a provisional ballot. Okay. I don't think universal balloting, to send out ballots to everybody. I mean, I don't think that's at all.
I don't agree with that. I think
I want to hear what Patty has to say.
better.
Yeah, I do too. Patty, have you left the forum?
No, I haven't. I was just listening. One of the things I've noticed with this election, and I think we could all agree on, is that the response to it has been much more dramatic than in past years. The threats of violence against poll workers, against governors, against secretaries of state, the fact that Christopher Krebs had to be escorted and have security in order to attend the hearing yesterday in the Senate, the fact that the Michigan electors had to be escorted in and secreted in order to vote for the Electoral College. This is something that we haven't seen before. So we've got into a new frenzy. And the only way that this stops is if, as you say, John, we can put some credibility into our election system. It's going to be very difficult to have federal mandates due to the fact that we would need a constitutional amendment in order to change that. But there are some things that we can do in individual states in order to revisit how voting standards are set up. I, like Brian, I'm sure he's not in favor of all mail-in balloting. I know we have 5 states, Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Hawaii, that have all mail-in. I want the option to be able to go to the polls and vote. I think that's a necessity. There are states, 8 or 10, like Montana, that allow all mail-in balloting or voting for certain special elections, and they have utilized that option in the past. I think we need to look at voting machines. I mean, there's been a lot of conspiracy theories about the Dominion voting machines. I am more concerned with the voting machines that do not have or produce paper ballots, so that you have a paper trail that you can check, and then you can have a better audit, a better recount. Ohio in the spring changed their voting systems and their machines to those which produce that produce a paper ballot for backup, which provides more of a sense of belief in these systems. Presently, we have states like Indiana, Texas, and New Jersey, and others that still have machines that do not produce a paper ballot. So it makes it much more difficult to go back and check to make sure that those machines weren't tampered with and that the voting amount was correct or not. We need to look into examining the voter rolls to make sure that they are accurate. And this doesn't mean to just go purge, and you can't do it willy-nilly. There are too many cases where voters have been purged from the ballot. They do not realize they've been purged from the ballot. And there's been a mistake because they have a similar name to somebody else. But yet in the same token, you need to go back and do this to make sure that you do not have dead people on that are supposedly voting. Now, in the cases that have been brought up about people that were voting that were dead or unregistered or so forth, most of that has been disproven. It's a case where, they have a name where they did not realize that someone had passed away, and they were sent an application for an absentee ballot, but they found that they didn't vote. So we're not seeing a great deal of fraud on that account. We need to look at fraud, I think, and examine it and prosecute it when it occurs. But it is not to the point where it is affecting the outcomes of ballots. After President Trump was elected, he had a committee that examined all of the allegations of fraud, and they found that while there were some small cases, they were not enough to affect the outcome of the election. I think that will be done after this election, but at this point, they have not found a number of cases of fraud that would have affected the outcome of the election.
Should that be the standard, Patty? Should that be the standard, that the irregularities don't matter as long as it doesn't affect the outcome?
No, and I'm not saying that. No. I'm just saying that if you go back and you check to make sure that it hasn't affected the outcome, that you prosecute those that have committed willful fraud.
Have we ever done that in any case?
Yes, they have prosecuted in the past, but there have been so few cases of it that it has not been a major concern. The thing is the fact that if you are checking for it and you are prosecuting those that have committed fraud, I think it would go a long way to people being satisfied with the outcome of an election. And then finally, I think that we have to have our leaders that will, instead of pushing conspiracy theories, that they will push for an election that is real, that will back up the validity of our elections and not go off on a tangent and create problems where none exist. I mean, I guess summarizing all of that, we need to examine to make sure that fraud doesn't exist.
And who should do that? Federal government?
Well, and the election boards do that, and there are committees, that can do that right now. Very honestly, listening to the proof that's been supplied by others about fraud where it's concerned. Unfortunately, a lot of these fraud, I use quote marks for this, cases that have been exemplified aren't cases of fraud. And it's unfortunately because people sometimes don't understand voting laws. I was listening, very good case. I was listening to Rudy Giuliani a while back, and he had a stack of papers of all the issue, affidavits of fraud. And he pulled up one and he said, here it is. This person has stated that when they went for voter training to work at the polls, they were told not to accept a driver's license as an ID. And then they went on the station and mentioned this 3 or 4 times about how awful it was. Voters at the polls were told not to look for or ask for a driver's license. Well, I've worked in the polls for many, many years. And in Ohio, you are told not to ask for a driver's license. The reason is that the driver's license is not the only form of identification that is acceptable. There's at least 10 others. What you were told to ask for is an ID, period. I'm sure that this person was told this. The problem is they probably didn't listen to the rest of the sentence. And the fact that they were told to ask for an ID, it doesn't have to be a driver's license. So here is this affidavit of fraud, which is really incorrect. And people get all excited over it. Does it have to be investigated? Yes, it should be. But to say that we have this out and out fraud and that we have people in the streets by the thousands saying that an election has been stolen, to have people's homes surrounded by those with guns threatening people. This happened in Michigan, yes.
Okay, and let me throw this on the table. Joe and Bryan seem to agree that there should be some way to have a standardized set of election rules across the country. Now, the Constitution states that the state legislators have the authority to state the time, place, and manner of elections. The fact that we've had governors making changes on their own, on the fly, is irrelevant at this point. But as you pointed out, Patty, it would take a constitutional amendment to give the federal government the authority to demand the state, the place, the time, and the manner in which an election is held. Do you think that we should have a constitutional amendment to give standardized election procedures across the board?
I wouldn't be opposed to it. I just don't see that that's going to happen. And there's such a difference, just, you know, like on IDs, you know, too many states say it has to be a
Do you
photo
think it would solve a lot of the problems?
I think it would solve a lot of the problems. I just don't see that happening.
So you used a word that I thought was really very well used, and that was drama. It's become very dramatic. And it's become dramatic usually by those who lose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to see in Georgia what happens. And Joe, I think you're probably right. Whoever loses is going to claim fraud in Georgia.
Right.
I would think a state would want to institute policies and procedures that would add to the credibility of a free and fair election.
Agreed.
I think they try. I think sometimes there are budget constraints. There's a human resource constraint. If you think of what our Board of Elections do when they have to validate signatures for absentee ballots, I mean, there's a really an in-depth process to ensure that that vote is an actual vote, that that person is actually the person that's voting, and that it's a credible vote. And I think, you know, over the last 8 years, we have seen the credibility of our election process eroded from both sides of the aisle. And
I'm sorry.
I
I
mean,
was just up at the Board of Elections this past week and pick up petitions I'm running for office in November. And they're still working. There's still things that they're doing from
Sure.
the last election. They are
yeah,
well overworked.
yeah.
And what we've seen across the country too is that fewer and fewer election sites, and it's basically monetary. So
Yeah. And it's hard to find people to man those polling places. But I think there can be some steps that I think a state would want to take. I'm very confident in the state of Ohio. I felt whoever voted, however you voted, whoever you voted for, that vote was counted and tabulated, and everybody took it seriously. There were no observers that showed up, but there was a process if they did.
yeah, the only thing I'd like to see changed in Ohio is the drop box situation for mail-in ballots.
Mhm.
While in Medina County, we just had one, but it's at a very convenient location to get to. It's located in the center of the county. Unfortunately, the state limited all counties to just one. And for example, if you lived in Summit County, that drop box was downtown Akron. It was not easily accessible. It would be nice if there were, in some counties, allowed to be more than one drop box for mail-in ballots, so that people could use them. Obviously, they would have to be, watched to make sure that they are secure, but it would
Sure.
make for accessibility for
Yeah.
voters.
Yeah.
That would be one change I would make it.
And that's completely reasonable.
Right.
There's no reason why any reasonable person would say, you know what, that sounds right. I mean, that's something we should probably put in place and put enough safeguards so we don't have ballot harvesting.
Right.
You know? So you don't have one person going out collecting thousands of ballots from somebody. From
Well,
different
folks, I
people.
think that our time is about up, and this week we're going to have to bow out with a little bit of honor instead of last time. But thank you very much, and see you in 1 month. We're going to skip a session,
Have a good
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.
New Year's Eve.
Merry
Yes.
Christmas.
Happy
Same.
holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.